Chapter 10, Part 2 of Aeroplanes and Dirigibles of War by Frederick A. Talbot. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. Recording by William Tomcho. Aeroplanes and Dirigibles of War by Frederick A. Talbot. Chapter 10, Part 2. Dropping bombs from aloft appears to be a very simple operation. But, as a matter of fact, it is an extremely difficult matter to strike the target, especially from a high altitude. So far as the aeroplane is concerned, it is somewhat at a disadvantage as compared with the airship, as the latter is able to hover over a position, and if a spring gun is employed to impart an initial velocity to the missile, there is a greater probability of the projectile striking the target provided it has been well aimed. But even then other conditions are likely to arise, such as air currents, which may swing the missile to one side of the objective. Consequently, adequate allowance has to be made for windage, which is a very difficult factor to calculate from aloft. Bomb dropping from an aeroplane is even more difficult. If, for instance, the aeroplane is speeding along at 60 miles an hour, the bomb, when released, will have a speed in the horizontal plane of 60 miles an hour, because momentarily it is traveling at the speed of the aeroplane. Consequently, the shell will describe a curved trajectory somewhat similar to that shown in Figure 7. On the other hand, if the aeroplane is traveling slowly, say at 20 miles an hour, the curve of the trajectory will be flatter, and if a headwind be prevailing, it may even be swept backward somewhat after it has lost its forward momentum, and describe a trajectory similar to that in Figure 8. A bomb released from an altitude of 1,000 feet seldom, if ever, makes a bee line for the earth, even if dropped from a stationary airship. Accordingly, the airman has to release the bomb before he reaches the target below. The determination of the critical moment for the release is not easy, inasmuch as the airman has to take into his calculations the speed of his machine, his altitude, and the direction and velocity of the air currents. The difficulty of aiming has been demonstrated upon several occasions at aviation meetings and other similar gatherings. M. Michelin, who has done so much for aviation in France, offered a prize of £1,000 to £5,000 in 1912 for bomb dropping from an aeroplane. The target was a rectangular space marked out upon the ground, measuring 170 feet long by 40 feet broad, and the missiles had to be dropped from a height of 2,400 feet. The prize was won by the well-known American airman, Lieutenant Riley E. Scott, formerly of the United States Army. He dropped his bombs in groups of 3. The first round fell clear of the target, but 8 of the remaining missiles fell within the area. In the German competition, which was held at Gotha in September of the same year, the results were somewhat disappointing. 2 targets were provided. The one represented a military bivouac occupying a superficies of 330 square feet, and the other a captive balloon resembling a zeppelin. The prizes offered were £500, £200, and £80, $2,500, $1,000, and $400 respectively, and were awarded to those who made the greatest number of hits. The conditions were by no means so onerous as those imposed in the Michelin contest, inasmuch as the altitude limit was set at 660 feet, while no machine was to descend within 165 feet. The first competitor completely failed to hit the balloon. The second competitor, flying at 800 feet, landed 7 bombs within the square, but only one other competitor succeeded in placing 1 bomb within the space. Bomb dropping under the above conditions, however, is vastly dissimilar from such work under the grim realities of war. The airman has to act quickly, take his enemy by surprise, avail himself of any protective covering which may exist, and incur great risks. The opposing forces are overwhelmingly against him. The modern rifle, if fired vertically into the air, will hurl the bullet at a height of about 5,000 feet, while the weapons which have been designed to combat aircraft have a range of 10,000 feet or more. At the latter altitude aggressive tactics are useless. The airman is unable to obtain a clear sharp view of the country beneath, owing to the interference offered to vision by atmospheric haze, even in the dearest of weather. In order to obtain reasonable accuracy of aim, the corsair of the sky must fly at about 400 feet. In this respect, however, the aeroplane is at a decided advantage as compared with the dirigible. The machine offers a considerably smaller target and moves with much greater speed. Experience of the war has shown that to attempt to hurl bombs from an extreme height is merely a waste of ammunition. True, they do a certain amount of damage, but this is due to luck, not judgment. For success in aerial bomb operations, the human element is mainly responsible. The daring airman is likely to achieve the greatest results, as events have proved, especially when his raid is sudden and takes the enemy by surprise. The raids carried out by Merrick's, Collett, Briggs, Babington, Sippe, and many others have established this fact incontrovertibly. In all these operations the airmen succeeded because of their intrepidity and their decision to take advantage of cover, otherwise a prevailing mist or low-lying clouds. Flight Lieutenant Collett approached the Zeppelin shed at Dusseldorf at an altitude of 6,000 feet. There was a bank of mist below, which he encountered at 1,500 feet. He traversed the depth of this layer and emerged therefrom at a height of only 400 feet above the ground. His objective was barely a quarter of a mile ahead. Traveling at high speed, he launched his bombs with what proved to be deadly precision, and disappeared into cover almost before the enemy has grasped his intentions. Lieutenant Commander, now Flight Commander, Merrick's was even more daring. Apparently he had no mist in which to conceal himself, but trusted almost entirely to the speed of his machine, which probably at times notched 90 miles per hour. Although his advent was detected and he was greeted with a spirited fusillade, he clung to his determined idea. He headed straight for the Zeppelin shed, launched 2 bombs, and swung into the higher reaches of the air without a moment's hesitation. His aim was deadly, since both bombs found their mark, and the Zeppelin docked within was blown up. The intrepid airman experienced several narrow escapes, for his aeroplane was struck 20 times, and 1 or 2 of the control wires were cut by passing bullets. The raid carried out by Commanders Briggs and Babington in company with Lieutenant Sippe upon the Zeppelin workshops at Friedrichshafen was even more daring. Leaving the Allies' lines, they ascended to an altitude of 4,500 feet, and at this height held to the prearranged course until they encountered a mist, which, while protecting them from the alert eyes of the enemy below, was responsible for the separation of the raiders, so that each was forced to act independently and to trust to the compass to bring him out of the ordeal successfully. Lieutenant Sippe sighted Lake Constance, and taking advantage of the mist lying low upon the water, descended to such an extent that he found himself only a few feet above the roofs of the houses. Swinging round to the lake, he descended still lower until at last he was practically skimming the surface of the lake, since he flew at the amazingly low height of barely 7 feet off the water. There is no doubt that the noise of his motor was heard plainly by the enemy, but the mist completely enveloped him, and, owing to the strange pranks that fog plays with sound, deceived his antagonists. At last, climbing above the bank of vapor, he found that he had overshot the mark, so he turned quickly and sped backwards. At the same time he discovered that he had been preceded by Commander Briggs, who was bombarding the shed furiously, and who himself was the object of a concentrated fire. Swooping down once more, Lieutenant Sippe turned, rained his bombs upon the objective beneath, drawing fire upon himself, but cooperating with Commander Babington, who had now reached the scene. He manoeuvred above the works and continued the bombardment until their ammunition was expended, when they sped homewards under the cover of the mist. Considering the intensity of the hostile fire, it is surprising that the aeroplanes were not smashed to fragments. Undoubtedly the high speed of the machines, and the zigzagging courses which were followed, nonplussed the enemy. Commander Briggs was not so fortunate as his colleagues. A bullet pierced his petrol tank, compelling a hurried descent. The most amazing feature of these aerial raids has been the remarkably low height at which the airmen have ventured to fly. While such a procedure facilitates marksmanship, it increases the hazards. The airmen have to trust implicitly to the fleetness of their craft and to their own nerve. Bearing in mind the vulnerability of the average aeroplane and the general absence of protective armoring against rifle fire at almost point-blank range, it shows the important part which the human element is compelled to play in bomb-dropping operations. Another missile which has been introduced by the French airmen, and which is extremely deadly when hurled against dense masses of men, is the steel arrow, or flechette, as it is called. It is a fiendish projectile consisting in reality of a pencil of solid polished steel, 4 3/4 inches in length. The lower end has a sharp tapering point, 5/8 of an inch in length. For a distance of 1 1/8 of an inch above this point the cylindrical form of the pencil is preserved, but for the succeeding 3 inches to the upper end the pencil is provided with 4 equally spaced angle flanges or vanes. This flanging of the upper end or tail ensures the arrow spinning rapidly as it falls through the air, and at the same time preserves its vertical position during its descent. The weight of the arrow is 2/3 of an ounce. The method of launching this fearsome projectile is ingenious. 100 or even more are packed in a vertical position in a special receptacle placed upon the floor of the aeroplane, preferably near the foot of the pilot or observer. This receptacle is fitted with the bottom moving in the manner of a trap door, and is opened by pressing a lever. The aviator has merely to depress this pedal with his foot when the box is opened and the whole of the contents are released. The fall at first is somewhat erratic, but this is an advantage, as it enables the darts to scatter and to cover a wide area. As the rotary motion of the arrows increases during the fall, the direct line of flight becomes more pronounced until at last they assume a vertical direction free from all wobbling, so that when they alight upon the target they are quite plumb. When launched from a height they strike the objective with terrific force, and will readily penetrate a soldier's helmet and skull. Indeed, when released at a height of 4,000 feet, they have been known to pierce a mounted soldier's head and pass vertically through his body and that of his horse also. Time after time German soldiers have found themselves pinned to the ground through the arrow striking and penetrating their feet. Owing to the extremely light weight of the darts, they can be launched in batches of hundreds at a time, and in a promiscuous manner when the objective is a massed body of infantry or cavalry or a transport convoy. They are extremely effective when thrown among horses, even from a comparatively low altitude, not so much from the fatalities they produce as from the fact that they precipitate a stampede among the animals, which is generally sufficiently serious and frantic to throw cavalry or a transport train into wild confusion. Although aerial craft, when skilfully handled, have proved highly successful as weapons of offense, the possibilities of such aggression as yet are scarcely realized. Aerial tactics are in their infancy. Developments are moving rapidly. Great efforts are being centered upon the evolution of more formidable missiles to be launched from the clouds. The airman is destined to inspire far greater awe than at present, to exercise a still more demoralizing influence, and to work infinitely more destruction. End of Chapter 10, Part 2. Recording by William Tomcho.